Chapter 2 of Tractate Pesachim continues going through the laws against eating, owning, or benefiting from Chametz, leavened bread, on the holiday of Passover. The Mishnah says, as long as you're allowed to eat Chametz, you can feed it to animals, domesticated or undomesticated, to birds, or sell it to a non-Jewish person, and you can benefit off of it. After the time passes that you can't have any, you can't benefit from chametz, and you can't fire an oven or stove with it. Some say you have to dispose of your chametz by burning it. Others say you can crumble it or scatter it or toss it into the ocean. The Gemara debates based on this who the implication is to who we hold like in regards to the timings of stopping eating and burning our chametz. We say it seems to reflect the third opinion of Rabban Gamliel, that unconsecrated chametz can be eaten in the 4th hour, consecrated chametz can be eaten in the 5th, and everything else is burnt in the 6th. And the Mishnah is saying that as long as a Kohen is still allowed to eat teruma during the 5th hour, non-Kohanim can feed unconsecrated chametz to animals or birds, but can't eat it themselves. It needed to mention domesticated and undomesticated animals and birds to include if the animals leave their food after, and if they hide it after, and then it just mentioned birds because they said the other two. We said you can sell your chametz to a non-Jewish person, unlike other opinions who disagree and say you can only do so if they'll eat it before Passover starts. Some say that if you burn your chametz, you can benefit from it after the deadline, and it's no longer considered chametz. There are further points, and according to the opinion that holds that you have to burn chametz, you can't benefit from it while it's burning. It also lists some verses as sources from all of this, and some related points. The sources are discussed and how they relate to other forbidden foods and meats. These points are spoken on further. It also discusses points on the permissibility of deriving benefit from various other forbidden substances. This is discussed further, and it brings other sources for the impermissibility to benefit from chametz on Passover and other similar concepts. These verses as sources are brought and discussed. This is brought further. It also mentions an opinion on a general rule that you're only liable for punishment by the time of the temple in regards to violating a prohibition in regards to eating food if you ate the food in a normal manner of consumption. Examples are given and it's discussed. There are other points on food you can't derive benefit from, things like meat cooked in milk and similar. It also says some related things that you can't generally benefit from. You can't be healed from the wood of the Asherah tree, which was used for some idolatrous practices back then, even if it's a life-threatening danger, as based on the source, you're meant to give up your life rather than serve an idol. In addition to having to give up your life to not serve an idol, the other two things, based on sources, that you'd need to give up your life rather than do are engaging in illicit relations and murdering an innocent man. So you need to let yourself die rather than kill another individual, save for if somebody is trying to kill or sexually assault you or somebody else. There are related points on forbidden medicinal benefits from foods which you can't use. This and further laws are discussed further. Related to the earlier point on not being allowed to fire an oven with chametz, it lists some other forbidden things that you can't fire your oven with, like the peels of arla, which are under 3-year-old grown fruits, or straw from forbidden plant mixtures in a vineyard. If it's a new oven, it must be shattered. If it was old, it must cool before its next use. There's argument as to who holds like these statements. There are further related points discussed. There's also discussion if you can fire an oven with consecrated wood. Some opinions say no, which is debated in relation to the other statements. It also discusses the method of disposal of chametz, which we said, according to one opinion, was burning, and how that relates to other types of food, if they're disposed of in a similar manner. It also discusses the other opinion that you can crumble it up and throw it into the wind and toss it into the sea. There's debate if you could do either or the requirement is to both crumble it and toss it into the sea, and if an idol needs to be destroyed in a similar manner. Sources seem to imply that both are required, and an idol can be tossed specifically into the Red Sea, which is not navigable, without first crushing it. Some say you only need to grind it first by the disposal of wheat kernels, which won't dissolve unless crumbled, but by bread, which dissolves in water, some say you can just toss it straight in. New Mishnah, chametz that a non-Jewish person owned over Passover, you can benefit from it after Passover. If the chametz was owned by a Jewish person over Passover, you can't benefit from it after, as the verse says, leaven shall not be seen by you. The Gemara disputes whose opinion this holds like. It also brings the verses which teach these laws. As for which opinions hold like these laws, it's further argued. It also gets into a discussion on chametz mixed with other foods, saying the mixture is forbidden on Passover no matter what it's mixed with, and it can't be nullified. If there's chametz left over Passover, it can be nullified by being mixed with permitted food of a different kind than itself, as long as the concentration of chametz is too small to impart any flavor. This is further discussed and how this principle applies generally by mixtures of forbidden food. We hold that chametz mixed with food on Passover is not allowed with any mixture, and chametz after Passover mixed with food is allowed, whether it was mixed with similar kinds of food or not. It also discusses earthenware pots used for chametz, saying that they contain chametz flavors and must be broken before Passover starts to prevent any cooking-related issues with these pots. Others say that you don't need to break them, you can just store them away until after Passover and then continue using them. There are some related cases by absorption by an oven. This is discussed further. In regards to knives, some say you should have a special designated set of knives for Passover that didn't absorb chametz, or at least purge and fully clean them to make them like a new set by wrapping the haft in clay, placing the blade in fire, removing the clay, and immersing the haft in boiling water. We say the haft and blade should be purged in boiling water in the primary vessel, in the vessel in which the water was actually boiled. It also says you can purge clean a wooden mixing spoon in boiling water in a primary vessel, as it expels flavor in the same way it absorbs. By glazed vessels, earthenware with a lead coating, it says that the green coating, meaning with a high alum content, is highly absorbent, so it can't be used on Passover. Other colors, black and white ones, also can't be used at all, whether they have cracks or not, as they're used for hot things, so they absorb more, unlike by forbidden wines. It says that vessels used for chametz while cold can be used on Passover, besides for sourdough or sharp condiment holders, as they have intense fermentation and will be more absorbed, and there are similar dishes listed. New Mishnah: if a non-Jewish person lent a Jewish person money before Passover and chametz was used as collateral, the chametz can be used for his benefit after Passover. If a Jewish person lent a non-Jewish person money before Passover with chametz as collateral, he cannot benefit from the chametz after Passover. The Gemara has a debate. If somebody had a mortgage on somebody's property and they fail to pay their debt, if the property is then collected retroactively or from that point on. This has practical ramifications if the lender consecrated or sold the property before the borrower failed to pay the loan. If it was retroactively his, then it was his when he sold it, so it works. If it's only his from then on, then that wasn't a valid sale. These opinions are debated from similarly related cases. It also discusses how this is related to the case by the chametz and lending, whether it's considered collateral as to who was considered to have owned it, and that there's distinction if the borrower specifies to the lender that he should only collect from now. This is further qualified. New Mishnah: if a ruin collapsed on your chametz, it's considered to not be in your ownership anymore. Rabban Gamliel clarifies that this applies only if it's buried deep enough that a dog can't unearth it while searching for it. The Gemara says an opinion that you'd also need to nullify it in your heart. The depth that it needs to be buried for this to apply is 3 handbreadths. Similarly, if you need to safeguard somebody's money, you should also bury it at least a handbreadth deep. New Mishnah: if somebody, a non-Kohen, accidentally eats chametz teruma on Passover, he repays it plus a fifth. If it was eaten deliberately, then you don't need to repay any of the teruma's value. The Gemara further qualifies these points. It's discussed further. There's more on this. It discusses if chametz can or can't acquire the sanctity of teruma on Passover. There's sources that imply not, but it's debated. There are similar points. It says that food less than an egg volume cannot generate impurities, so if grape juice is squeezed out of grapes that are impure, if there's less than an egg's volume, the juice is pure, which is discussed a bit further. There are related points brought. There's a bit of a lengthier point from here about the laws of teruma in regards to how they can contract or generate ritual impurity, a topic which was more broadly discussed in the first chapter. These points on certain sacrifices, crushing grapes, and how they relate to some laws of impurity are discussed further. New Mishnah: there is a biblical obligation to eat matzah on the first night of Passover. It can be made of wheat, barley, spelt, rye, or oats. It can be made with demai, questionably tithe produce, or from ma'aser rishon, which teruma was removed from it, or redeemed ma'aser sheni, or consecrated produce. Kohanim can eat matzah made from the challah portion tithe or from teruma. You cannot eat matzah made from tevel, untithed produce, or ma'aser rishon, which you haven't separated teruma from, or non-redeemed ma'aser sheni or consecrated produce. With the unleavened loaves of a Thanksgiving offering or unleavened wafers of the Nazir offering, if you made them for yourself with intent to use them as offerings, you can't use them as matzah, but if they were made to be sold in the market, you can use them for matzah. The Gemara elaborates on the definition of the 5 grains that matzah can be made from, along with the verses that bring the source for this. Some say based on the verses that you're not fully liable for the punishment of kares, for eating dough that was kneaded with wine, oil, or honey instead of water, as these are considered to be similar to fruit juice, which we say cannot cause dough to leaven. The points on tithes we mentioned as to which kinds of foods and their relation can be used validly for matzah are discussed further, and it also brings some sources. It also gets into whether you can make matzah from grain that has the sanctity of ma'aser sheni, which is a disputed point. It also further debates the permissibility of making dough with wine, oil, or honey. We also say that you can't knead the dough with lukewarm water, which accelerates the leavening process, which is discussed. It also brings a source that you cannot use the bikurim, the first of the fruits, by wheat and barley, which were donated to the Kohanim, as matzah, which is also debated at length. It also explains how the matzah is called lechem oini, poor man's bread, which excludes several nicer types of loaves. It also discusses the thickness of matzah. Some say it's compared to the lechem hapanim, the showbread in the temple, which wasn't leavened either and was a handbread thick. So some say it can be up to that thickness too, but others reject this comparison. We say what it refers to by prohibiting thick loaves just means that you can't bake many loaves, as you're excessively exerting yourself on the holiday, which would actually apply by all holidays. We also say that you can make matzah with white bread, coarse bread, or with decorated shapes on the surface, although some disagree about decorated shapes, as then you'll take too long and the bread will leaven and rise. Some say it's allowed if it's with thinner rolled dough. It also says some unique kinds of bread, wafers, pan loaf, honey bread, and others, which are exempt from the obligation to separate a portion of challah, which is then donated to the Kohanim. This is debated. We also say in the discussion that you can use half-baked matzah, which means that you can break it in half without strands of dough stretching out of it. The points on what types of bread need to have the challah portion tied separated from them is further discussed. It also goes through the remaining points on making matzah using the listed tithe-related produce. We also bring sources for the fact that you can't use matzah made from the Thanksgiving or Nazirite offering, as they're made for yourself, which are debated. And we said that they're permissible if it's made for the market, as when you do that, you're anticipating the possibility that they won't be sold, in which case they'll be used for the Passover obligation of matzah, so they're allowed to be used. New Mishnah. The other obligation besides for matzah to eat on Passover is marror, bitter herbs. This could be any of the following vegetables: romaine lettuce, horseradish, palm tree, vine, wormwood, and others. You can eat them whether they're moist or dry, but not when they're preserved, stewed, or cooked. You need to eat an olive-sized portion, so you can eat several of these to combine to that amount. You can eat the stalks of the plants with questionably typed produce, with Ma'aser Rishon, which has had its teruma separated, and with Ma'aser Sheni and consecrated produce, which were redeemed. The Gemara defines a lot of the vegetables listed above and gives an expanded list. Some say the vegetable must be a bitter herb which has sap and is pale green. This is discussed along with source for these laws. It also says you're allowed to plant any vegetable which is valid as marror together on one bed, without violating the prohibition against planting different mixtures of plants together on a bed that is 6x6 handbreadths with 4 types on the sides and 1 in the center, as discussed in Tractate Shabbos on page 84b. So this wouldn't just apply to seeds, it would also apply by these vegetables, even romaine lettuce, which hardens as its stalk thickens. It nevertheless doesn't require additional space in spite of that. In regards to the marror being allowed to be moist or dry, that is said to apply just to the stalk. The leaves are only viable to use if they're moist. We also say, similar to matzah, ma'aser sheni vegetables cannot be used as marror. New Mishnah. There are many things not allowed on Passover, as they could cause you to create chametz. You cannot soak bran for chickens, although you may scald it. A woman can't soak bran to use as a cleaning agent in a bath, but she can use bran for her skin. You can't chew wheat grain to place on a wound, as that turns it into chametz. The Gemara says that things which were baked then cooked, or scalded in boiling water, cannot become chametz. There are similar points listed, like not to thicken a pot of food with flour of oven-dried grain, as if it didn't bake properly, it can make chametz. There are related points, and it says it's better not to soak grain on Passover, barley, or even wheat. Some say it's outright forbidden. This is for the discussed. There are similar cases. A ship laden with wheat sank in a river before Passover, and the salvaged wheat was impermissible to be sold to Jews, as it was chametz, which is discussed further, along with points on the permissibility of thickening a pot with flour made from oven-dried grain. New Mishnah, further on this topic of not doing things that can make chametz, you cannot add flour to a certain type of meat dip or to mustard. If you do, some say you should eat it immediately, others don't allow this. The paschal offering cannot be cooked in liquid or fruit juice, but it can be basted or dipped in them. Back to chametz, water used by a baker to cool his hands must be poured out in case dough gets stuck inside and becomes leavened. The Gemara qualifies the argument on eating the dip that's by mustard. By the meat dip, everybody agrees that it must be burnt immediately. Sources are brought. This is discussed along with points on the proper methods of preparation of the Passover offering that was brought back by the temple that it also can't be partially roasted or cooked, but it can be fully cooked to a char. You also can't eat it raw. There are further points. Points on the laws of proper preparation of the Paschal offering are further brought. There's more on this in regards to disposing the water that a baker uses to wash his hands. If there's a lot of it, it should be poured onto an inclined surface where it can't pool. We also say that you should only knead matzah using water that slept, called mayim shalanu, meaning that it was left overnight, so it cools off beforehand. It also says not to knead matzah in the sun, which would heat up the dough, or with sun-heated water, or with other variants of hot water. You should also not stop during the entire process of making matzah to prevent it from having time to ferment. You should also have 2 separate water vessels, one for the dough and one to cool your hands. In the event that you needed matzah using warm water, there's a disagreement if this dough is permissible as matzah, and the logics are briefly explained. And that's the end of chapter 2.